My name's Bryce Webster. I've been involved with leverage breakdowns since about 2021 or so. In total, I've spent about 20 years in the real estate industry doing equity debt, public, private, lots of different things, mostly in New York City. And for the last 6 years, I've been an independent advisor and real estate advisor to firms and real estate firms and family offices. So I'm going to briefly tell you about the purpose of leverage breakdowns. Some of you probably already know that. Talk about the agenda for this call. We're going to try and keep it a tight 60 minutes. And then finally introduce Ed Sapp, who is the guest today on our call. So the purpose of leverage breakdowns is to help students and young professionals accelerate their career in real estate. Kind of started as a side project, evolved into a little bit of a business. The first product was a real estate financial modeling course for private equity acquisitions. And we've since expanded into industry guides, interview prep materials, and an online networking group on Discord, which if you're not already in, by the way, we can send a link. I'll put it in the chat to sign up and join that group. In the last chapter, with AI sort of dominating, how work is getting done, we've written a few blog posts on our thoughts on AI, how it will impact the real estate industry, and what you can do to prepare yourself, career-wise. So I'll put those in the chat as well if you haven't seen those blog posts. In terms of this call, the purpose is to introduce a case study on modeling a multifamily development deal, answer questions on the case or otherwise. So if you have other questions that you want to touch on, feel free to bring that up as well. The case consists of a case prompt, which describes the deal. It's a fictional multifamily development deal in Los Angeles, California. There are various inputs, in the prompt, and then there's the answer key. The answer key is essentially just a completed model, a completed development model that Ed Sapp and his team have put together with certain outputs. So we also have a blank answer key, which is sort of like the framework of the model, which would leave some, work for you to do and fill it in. So after going through the model, we'll quickly demo also how we use Claude to build a development model for this case, which was way less time and probably 80 to 90% of the way there. Not perfect, but pretty good. We'll also show you some metrics that we kind of like to focus on to check Claude's work and make sure the model makes sense and passes the smell test. Then after the call, we'll send you the prompt and the blank answer key, which is just, again, the framework of the model with nothing really filled in if you want to do it yourself. And then, of course, we'll be available on Discord on the networking group to answer questions. That's typically how we talk to people and trying to be helpful. So let's get to Edward. Edward is the founder of Sapp Capital Advisors, and he'll be leading most of this call. Edward has more than 10 years of experience in the industry, including real estate investment banking and several years at a mega real estate private equity firm. Several years ago, he since launched his own firm, Sapp Capital, to advise real estate entrepreneurs, private equity firms, and hedge funds on real estate underwriting and modeling. He does a really good job with that. And honestly, in my 20 years of experience, he's probably the best at building models that I've ever seen. Before I kick it over to Ed, just a couple of quick notes. We are recording this call because we wanted to make it available via YouTube and send it out to folks who couldn't make it during this time. And then second, we'll try and keep it a tight 60 minutes. We'll finish up right at 5 p.m. or before. But we're going to bake in 15 or 20 minutes of Q&A at the end if there's anything you want to touch on. And then also feel free to interrupt us during the call and we can answer questions if we're going through something. Just go ahead and speak up. It's a small group today, so don't be shy. With that, I will turn it over to Ed.
Well, thank you, Bryce. I appreciate that. And thanks, everyone, for trusting us with your hour today at the end of a long work day, presumably for everybody. So background, like Bryce said, I've worked in real estate kind of on the private equity and investment banking side since graduating. And my background was also in New York City, pretty much just I worked at Credit Suisse as an analyst, and then I worked at Brookfield as an investments acquisitions person and got to do all sorts of cool stuff. And I've been blessed for 3 years and change now to work to have Sapp Capital Advisors. And then we've got on my team Baltazar, who's been really pivotal in helping us design and produce these materials. It's obviously been a team effort, but I just want to quickly introduce Baltazar. He'll be observing predominantly, but he's a critical member of the team too.
Thank you, nice to meet you all. I'm Baltazar, and I've been here in the company for around 2 years, and I'm the analyst here. I'm based in Mexico. I studied bachelor's degree in finance in Mexico in Guadalajara at Tec de Monterrey.
All right, so with our introductions out of the way, I want to be cognizant of the reason everybody joined, which is the case study. So let me go ahead and share my screen, and there's only so many of us on the call, so I'm using one of these wide monitors. If it's too difficult to read, so just like shout and let me know. I'll try to be cognizant of like multiple screen sizes. So can everyone read generally, or I'll assume everyone can read what's on my screen right now on the left and the right side, but if it's too hard, speak up and let me know. Okay, sweet. So this is a multifamily development model. As Bryce mentioned, the case, which you will receive at the end of this call, and we hope you'll feel inspired to try to run through yourself, consists of a prompt, which we'll go through. This is a answer key, which you'll be able to develop yourself from the empty answer key. And we'll have a portion of this call dedicated to going through each one of these files. So you've got the prompt, which is basically the challenge at hand, the empty answer key, which is, I don't even know how to count how many hours, but this is a lot of work is reflected in this, and it's battle tested by a lot of the deals that we've done. So this is one of the main ways that we often underwrite multifamily developments, but you could quickly re-leverage these concepts to dynamically model developments of really any asset class. And then we have a filled in answer key, which I'll use to show you on the call. But the idea is not really to provide that one, because the empty answer key kind of just this case is pretty straightforward as far as cases go, and you'll see. And then we've got a unit mix, which is the only file really needed for the prompt of the case. So let me dive into this prompt and show you how this works. So in this case, you'll step into the role of an analyst evaluating a ground-up multifamily development opportunity. The goal is to build a simplified financial model that captures how a multi-development project evolves from land acquisition through construction, stabilization, refinancing, and eventual exit. That kind of hints at some of these dynamic capital structure things that we'll have to build into the model in just a second. The case focuses on understanding how timing, capital structure, lease-up dynamics, and refinancing events interact to drive investor returns. So if I flip to kind of the completed example, what you'll see right here is kind of the heart of any model that we build, which is a cash flow page, right? That indicates the dollars in and the dollars out every month. This deal is going to have elements such as land purchase, and then you're going to have construction costs, which are modeled out kind of in these next 3 years. And then funding all of that is going to be an initial construction loan that is collateralized by the land purchase and construction timing. But the trick is that you may not have that loan by the time you make your first spend, right? Because a lot of these principals that we work with start investing in these projects or maybe buy the land before they have the loan all tied up or all of the plans and designs ready. So that's one of the intricacies in this case. So you're evaluating proposed multifamily development in Los Angeles, California. The project consists of 120 residential units across multiple buildings, a phased lease-up schedule tied to building delivery timing. So there's a lot of complexity that's kind of hidden in here, in that these buildings are not all being delivered at the same time. You're going to put up building 1 and then 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 at different times. And so that's going to impact your ability to stabilize and continue construction financing. The construction timeline does, like I mentioned, separate the early pre-loan and the later post-loan costs. And the capital structure includes both equity and construction debt. So you're going to see in our sources and uses, which is another key part of the model. And if what I'm saying is like a fire hose of information, that's hopefully the Discord and the Q&A we'll have at the end of this call will be helpful. But the sources and uses is going to be the place where you can just see every dollar that funds the project. So as you see, we will be dynamically modeling construction debt and equity. Dynamically meaning you could change anything that's in blue on this model that you see in blue on any of these sheets, particularly the summary and the unit mix. And those numbers, you can refresh the model and it will update. So your interest reserve and everything will be dynamically modeled to reflect what you expect out of this project. The simplified source package is provided as part of the case materials. It includes a unit mix source file. And like I said, we provided an empty answer key, which we've referred to in this case as the easy version, because when you scroll down, and we'll get to this in a second, the exercise involved in the case is really just filling in the orange parts. What's going to be difficult is trying to go from that to doing this all from scratch in your head if you're really trying to take it there. So this is one case, but this is definitely something to chew on for a while, especially as you personally start peeling back what's kind of behind the curtain on a lot of these inputs. So scrolling back up to where we were in the case. So there's the easy and the hard version. The hard version, of course, being just taking the case prompt and doing it from scratch, which is effectively what we had Claude do, which we'll get into after this walkthrough. So rather than assuming all the units begin paying rent at once, each building has to come online separately. If you look in our cash flow in the filled in answer key, the rental income comes online on a staggered basis based on the custom inputs per building. So when you're looking at your own answer key file, you'll see all this logic already built in, but it'll be helpful to see how we like to kind of bring things online like that, like a convenient way to have clustered inputs for different buildings. So you can see the first rent's in March, but then it grows up to the maximum rental value over a scheduled period of time, which is also a mix of dynamic inputs, right? And the cool thing about this is you can replace building one with unit line one, right? And the model still functions for a development. So then the task is based on the information below. Your goal is to build a simplified multifamily development model from scratch. Your model should be able to track total project costs and timing, both pre-loan and post-loan. So not only do you need to know how much it's going to cost you in total, but that bifurcation. And we'll get into that. So let me jump into why that's important. So when you look at a summary of a model like this, this is the summary sheet. And there's a lot of things that people care about. But like I said, sources and uses is always a big one. Your sources and uses is going to just reflect the amount of money that you use to fund it and what all that's going to. And where development models start to get tricky is the origination fee and the interest reserves are kind of circular upon themselves, because the sizing of that loan, as the loan gets bigger, you get more interest, but because you get more interest, the loan itself is the thing that pays that interest during the construction phase. So there's a little bit of intricacy there, and I'll flag that. You'll have to model a construction loan with delayed funding and interest carry. So if you go into the cash flow and you look on these first two columns, that's going to be your annual cash flows. But then you go into the monthly cash flows, you can actually see here that there is some funding of costs before the loan. So this model specifically begins in December of 2025. It assumes our client bought this project at the end of last year, and now they're kind of getting started with it. They started to spend a little bit of construction before the loan was actually even issued, as you can see in the monthly cash flows. And how do you get a model to kind of know that and to play with that? And all at the same time, while you are dynamically modeling your project costs, how do you get that model to know how much equity exactly you want to do? That's just going to be a trick of kind of plugging in the LTC that you're targeting in this kind of a deal. Keep going through here. try because I know we have time limits, so I'm not trying to get too in the weeds as I go through these concepts. Walking through the cash flow story a bit more. So we've kind of covered how the rental income comes online on a monthly basis. Your monthly cash flows are on the right side of this model. You've got a vacancy factor, which is very common in these models. And then you've got operating expenses. You've got some parking income and some parking vacancy, which are controlled from this operating sheet here. And then you have operating expenses, which are in this model driven a little bit more simplistically, because this is one of our clients that is not so in the weeds on their OPEX assumptions. We drive that off of a margin assumption, which just takes your income and then multiplies it by a percentage to back into what your expenses would be. This one is going to come down to preference. Obviously, if you're not a fan of that, you could even explore how to rewire this model so that this OPEX line drives off of payroll, utilities, real estate taxes, all broken out. So hopefully that's helpful. Refinancing. So trying to get my way to the refinancing and the cash flow story. So you generate net operating income, which I assume most people are familiar with that concept, but it's basically the profit in real estate. It's kind of like just the recurring income that you make off of property outside of your capital expenditures. You've got a time you purchase and your construction costs. You've got an eventual exit of the asset in 10 years, which is going to be sized off your cap rate. In this model and in pretty much every model that we do, we're going to size our exit valuation and our refi valuations as far as the collateral value goes. Maybe not the DSCR sizing for the refi, but we'll use the next 12 months NOI. So we've got dynamic model logic in there to pool at any date. You can change the exit date, and this model will dynamically kind of shut off your cash flows after that exit date. You're going to be playing with your exit timing here by selecting the hold period months. So you've got your NOI, you've got your construction costs, which are timed out and phased. That brings you to your total unlevered cash flows, which is effectively just the cash flows of the deal, regardless of financing. So ignoring how you're going to use debt and when the equity remainder is going to come out of your pocket. This is just what the project itself demands. The initial loan draws, I've spoken to that, and the intricacies of how that works are going to be down here in the section of the model called debt backup. Debt backup is a 40-ish row section that has a few additional parameters. So what we like to do in our models is we like to build stuff kind of beneath the cash flows on the same monthly and annual timelines. The debt backup is definitely going to be something that I can see people poking around in and pinging lots of questions about in the Discord channel for sure. It's an interesting piece of the model. We might have time to get into that if people are interested. The IRR and the monthly the returns for this deal are going to be shown here. So we've got a returns panel here in the right. And then the refi loan will be your last piece of kind of big-ish logic that you're going to encounter in this model. The refi loan is down here in the assumptions page, and that is going to dictate the size of the loan that you get at stabilization. So a common trend in real estate finance is to do your development, build the building, get it leased up, and then once you've got the building leased up, so basically by the time that your last person is stabilized, or based on a specific date that your client might just tell you to put into the model for specific reasons, you will choose to do a refinancing. Now, a very fast way to model a refi is to do it based off of your cap rate and to come at a valuation at refi. And you can see we're doing that here. So by the time we refi, it's June 2030. So we assume we have $2.2 million in the deal. The cap rate's is 6. That gets us to a $35 million valuation. If we're going to do an 80% LTV, then that gets us to a $28.8 million valuation per LTV. But another thing that is important, super important to consider in your refi assumptions is also a debt service coverage ratio. A debt service coverage ratio is basically what is your debt service. So that's going to be your interest payment and your amortization payment represented by a payment constant. That is, so for a loan, if it's at 5.5%, your payment constant for that is going to be 6.8%. And so given that at refi, you have 2.2 million of NOI, that NOI should be 1.25x bigger than your debt service. So if you have a refi of what's allowed by your LTV issuance, and you have a payment constant of 6.81% on that, that's going to be 1.9 million. Unfortunately, your NTM NOI at refi, if you went just with the LTV, would be too much. So one of these things you have to look out for, especially if you're relying on refi returns when you're kind of reporting to investors and stuff, is can you actually handle that from a DSCR and a debt yield test perspective as well? We don't have a debt yield test here. The DSCR kind of covers that for us, but that's obviously something else you can do, and we can get into that if anyone is ever curious. So as you can see, this is capped by the DSCR test. If you wanted to change that, you could always change it. But that's basically how the sizing happens, and all of that happens on a kind of dynamic basis. So if you changed the inputs on the rents, this would change automatically as well. You've got a refi origination fee, you've got a fixed rate, you've got an amortization period of 360. So basically that is how the refi works, and you can see there is a delta between the amount of refi loan and the construction loan. So even at refi, at that moment that you issue that refi loan, you get a decent influx of cash, which the investors are going to appreciate. And so this one of the things that you got to be careful about when looking at annual cash flows is obviously you're not going to get 5 million of net refi proceeds. This is an annual cash flow, so that's going to include some NOI and debt service in there as well. So you can get a more granular perspective of that exact month's proceeds in there. And then, of course, on the summary, we just went ahead and did for you 4.665 million. So that's kind of the main goal of the case and a more fleshed out example. So focusing on, like, I know we were just in the weeds for a bit on the filled in answer key for this model, but you should learn how development timing drives financial outcomes, the relationship between lease-up NOI and valuation, how debt interacts with equity during construction. So you'll notice that our equity number in this model is toggled equity first. You could actually change it to be pari passu, but you'll see that when you go into the cash flows, our equity is completely spent first. 6 million goes out the window first before you start drawing. If you flip that to pari passu, what's interesting is that this 6 million that goes out initially, I'm summing the negative levered cash flows. Negative levered cash flows equals equity. That's a rule that pretty much most models adhere to. If you did pari passu, then you would actually get a slug of equity from the construction loan and then continue to fund evenly thereafter. So there's a lot of little nuances that kind of determine the cash flow story of any deal that are usually really important to understand, especially with investors who are concerned with capital return. And then finally, we did mention structuring a basic real estate waterfall, and that is one place that I have not gotten into too great detail. But this case will provide the inputs that we expect the waterfall to run off of. This one is doing a very basic preferred return with one hurdle and then a final tier after that first hurdle. So if you've ever heard someone say 15 over a 12 and then a 25 thereafter, this is the kind of return that they're talking about. So we have a whole thing on waterfalls on our site if you're trying to like really get into a deep dive on that. So I'll assume most people are at least vaguely familiar with the concept of a waterfall, but this helps you determine when the money starts coming back, who gets paid first and when. And so with the 12% pref, anyone who actually put cash in gets their cash back up to a 12% return. And then after a 12%, the general partner or the sponsor in the deal is going to be promoted 15%. So every dollar after 12%, that GP is going to go from whatever their cash contribution was, which was a 5%, they're going to get promoted 15% to a 20% total share of those hypothetical cash flows. And this waterfall it's our preferred way of building it, and it's definitely worth poking around, especially if you're someone who needs to build a lot of waterfalls. I find that waterfall modeling, more than anything, is much more of an art than a science. And I mean that with debt modeling and all these things that kind of go into your lever cash flow, there's generally a correct and an incorrect way to do it, or like a really correct and then like a fast but not quite as correct way to do it. The waterfalls, people get a lot more artistic with them. It's really just about slicing the pie, and people can come up with all sorts of provisions and waterfalls that are unique and different. And it's not so much like this is correct or not. It's more about how popular is this developer, how many people want to give them their money, and how creative are they in terms of structuring their waterfalls with like catch-ups and stuff. So this is a pretty vanilla waterfall though, and this represents probably about 70% of the waterfalls I do look something like this. Not necessarily these exact numbers, although these are close to market. I've seen developers do a range around these numbers too. It really depends on who and the specific market that they're in. I think I've spoken to each one of these key modeling challenges, and I'm trying to stay cognizant of time. This part this is going to be kind of the take-home section of the case, and I've treated much of this bottom section that I'm scrolling through now as a given. You'll notice as you work through this that since you guys will be receiving the kind of the empty DIY answer key, this first case, and we hope to do many more and kind of ramp up the intensity over time. This first case is more or less okay, units 120, got it. So where's units in my model? We've made it orange for you, so it's kind of easy to find. So you can see, okay, units are here in the unit mix. So that's where you would be inputting your units. Average rent, $2,200 a month. It's also worth mentioning that we did also just give you this unit mix, so you can kind of drop this into the model. It's a pretty obvious space. I can dive deeper, but let me pause now because I've walked through the solved answer key. I've kind of hinted at the empty answer key that you guys will have to work with. I can talk to these things, but really these are just the core inputs that drive it. So I think it'd be interesting to spend the rest of our time walking through kind of Bryce's approach with Claude and, Baltazar and Bryce's analysis of how like our gold standard model, which considers everything, compares to. Oh yeah, Chris. I don't know if you want to unmute.
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Thanks for that. That was great. I was just curious if you could talk a little bit about the capitalized interest and how you built that here. Sort of curious how.
Yeah, I'll
provide you the circularity.
Yeah, so it is circular. So you will need to enable iterative calculations. So if you don't know how to do that, it's a quick Google, but the screen will look like this. And then you just click that on, right? And then F9 to refresh, let it recalc. You'll see in the bottom right, iterations will turn on. You got to let all those finish before you even touch your screen. But in terms of how we actually did that, the debt backup is going to be down here. And the main spot for that is going to be our NOI less debt service negatives only. So this is going to more or less be how we figured out the interest reserve. And you'll see that we have a dynamic approach to interest reserve where you could either pre-fund it all at once, which would kind of draw more capital and create like a cash account, or you could fund as you go using a toggle in there. Actually, this one doesn't have the toggle. I spoke too soon. But yeah, so it's more of a dynamic thing based off of cash flow covered by NOI. Once you have NOI, you stop having to fund it with the loan.
So
Right, so you're just
go ahead, Chris.
Gotcha. So it looks like you're just taking the negative cash flow before. I mean, I'm looking at this now, or maybe like negative NOI, and using that to fund your interest expense. And so as you change your assumptions, and as that changes the model,
Yeah.
that's going to flex up or down. I dealt with this a little before and had to build like a circ switch. So I don't know, like a toggle to basically shut everything on and off just in case the model refs out. So I don't know. I was curious, like when you built it, how you kind of avoided that, because I've run into those issues before.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's gonna be the proof's gonna be in the pudding there, but basically you can kind of visualize the answer to that. You can see the loan starts to get drawn on, and you've got a limited amount of interest up until you actually start generating an NOI on this building. And just given the speed at which this particular building started generating monthly, rents per every unit, there's a limited phase where you needed to cover before NOI could cover. Slash, this example might be a little bit different than what you would typically see. But if you were to change those dates, this NOI wouldn't come online, and therefore these draws from interest reserves would continue going. And this one kind of splits the difference, right? Because you've got just a little bit of NOI, but not all of it.
And then your construction debt is sized off of everything, right? So as let's say you push out the lease up, you're going to have modeling a larger loan because your total
exactly,
bro.
Okay, exactly. And so that's kind of what this like what you should learn bit is hinting at. Yeah, exactly that.
Okay.
Yeah, and if you look at the sources and uses, right? So the circular part in the uses table, Ed, is going to be that initial loan interest reserve, right? The 88,000.
Yep.
Yeah. So, and let's just go through how the construction loan balance is calculated. If you go back to that, or you zoomed in on that table. So you calculate your uses, which is 26 million. I guess initially the initial loan interest reserve would be 0. And then you're going to calculate your construction debt, which is, you're saying 77% LTC.
Yep.
Yeah. So that's the size of your loan. And then based on that, and based on the pace of lease up, you're getting that 88,000, and that's the circular part of the model, correct?
Exactly.
So if we go ahead and just change, change it to 75% or something LTC, and just curious, like.
Right.
Yeah, so less debt means less interest reserve, which means total cost of the project is a little bit lower.
Yeah,
but
got it.
Yeah,
and you can
like you said here, it's so small. Like I don't know if it's dynamic enough to push back the lease up, because typically I think you're going to have a longer construction period and more interest flowing through on that reserve. But I don't know if we can do that now, but.
Yeah, you can totally just like, if we wanted to play with the assumptions, like say we set, so this would be that +2, and those are clearly staggered by about 2 each. So if this actually happens, it goes, crap. Using the first of the month, of course. Come on, 12. Let's push it out like 12 more months. Right. So I just kind of pushed all the first rents out by 12 months. So you're going to see this one's going to disappear, and then these interest draws are going to grow. So
got it. And then just the last question.
Yep.
That makes sense. I'll play around. Last question. Like in practice, you probably go to a lender with your proposed stack and this, and they're going to give you a fixed amount. And then if you draw less, that'll get returned when you finish construction. And if you need to put in more, you're just going to come out of pocket for that, right? Like I assume a lender is going to just fix the reserve based on some number. You're going to go to them with the cap stack, and then they'll go from there. Or in your experience, do they let you kind of keep it dynamic?
They're usually going to set an interest reserve in the budget, and that's what like a contingency also kind of helps with in a model, right? Like a hard cost contingency. So like, you don't want it to be like the exact dollar you think it's going to be. You definitely want to have some cushion in there on cost, but then that also, because your costs have a contingency, your interest reserve also has a contingency on it. And then maybe they round it a little bit or something like that.
Okay. All right, cool. That's helpful.
Yeah, the lender will probably say like 1.5x, whatever they think it's going to be, to build in some cushion, maybe 2x, depending on how conservative they're going to be. And then, if you don't use it, you don't use it. But yeah, the worst thing as a developer is to have like surprise capital calls. So it's also good from the developer standpoint to have a little extra built in there.
Yeah. So this will be a helpful.
And then, do you
example.
have the toggle, the switch for turning off interest in case the model has reference errors in here?
Yeah, sure. So that's going to be down here. So what might happen while you're playing with this model is you might type in like, okay, this is real fun. Turn off autosave. You might like type the letter A into your model or something dumb, right? And then the whole thing does this. I'm sure we've all seen this or dreaded seeing this at like midnight, right? What you're gonna want to do, okay, so you fix it, right? You say, okay, it's not the letter A. I'm stupid, shouldn't have done that. Wait, it still says value, but I fixed it, right? Like what's going on? The problem is that these are like if you remember like your high school math, the way this works is like asymptotic, right? But it keeps the problem in that loop. So you got to flush the problem out. And so the way you flush the problem out is with a circuit breaker. So I've already built it. You can trace dependence to find out how this is built, but you flip it to 0, refresh it, you flip it back to 1, and then the problem should sort itself out. I suppose this circuit breaker was not built appropriately because that did not do the trick. True. Yeah, so that equals 0 to 0. So the way you fix a broken circularity breaker, because sometimes I don't even break the circularity, so I do a bad job, I guess, in that one. Anyway, we'll fix it before we send this out to you. But the gist is that you take care of that way.
Should I jump into any other questions, I guess, first? Yeah, Tom, go ahead.
Hey Bryce, hey Edward. I had a quick question. So when you talked about the answer key in the beginning, which is going to be filled out with these orange highlighted cells, is that answer key, if we just put in the assumptions in there, is the answer key going to be like fully dynamic in a sense that once you fill those orange cells, it shows up it'll get the whole model working?
Yes, exactly. And I mean, like, this is definitely a huge, thank you guys for joining our first one of these. And I don't know how often we'll be kind of giving full models like this. We'll see, but this is definitely a competitive model. Put it that way. So yeah, it'll work, and the whole thing should drive off of as you slowly fill the inputs in.
Gotcha. And one more question is, it seems like you guys are using a specific program for the trace dependent functionality, and I would love to just download one for my personal computer as well. Do you guys have any like recommendations for that, or?
So I use Macabacus, which is a paid tool. It's not that expensive, and it pays for itself within the first hour of using it, as far as my life goes. But really, it's any tool like SPCap IQ, Goldman, and my old bank Credit Suisse have their own in-house tools, and you could probably find a free tool. The main thing is going to be Control Shift Open Bracket for the, like you said, dynamically tracing. So maybe Claude or ChatGPT will be like, what's like a free way to do that thing that Macabacus does if you're not trying to spend money. But I love Macabacus. They don't do referral links though, so I haven't. That's just me. That's just me talking.
Gotcha. Thank you so much. And then I guess like one more question is, I recently joined Leverage Breakdown, the subscription course. So I was wondering, I've downloaded like some of the files that are available on the website, but there's not associated like videos walking you through it, right? Am I just not finding the right videos for them?
That's a good question. I'll try to just quickly answer that. So you go to the website, and then this is kind of separate to the case, but you go to course, and then you start at part 1 essentials, and then you have to be logged in. This page looks different because I'm not logged in right now, but this will be the part that you click, and this will let you go through a series of videos, and then there's like intermittent things in it. So part 1 is what I recommend starting on, but deep dive is going to be that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and the deep dive is that's the multifamily. Yeah. One, right? Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But
And
just
that's
so that I'm aware, those two are the only videos that are in the website, correct?
yeah, correct. And then everything
Gotcha.
else is going to be those guides and things that you may have also required.
Gotcha.
Yeah, and
All
if
right,
you're
thank
not
you
on
so much.
the Discord networking group, I'm not sure if you mentioned you aren't, but we can chat with you there if you have questions too.
Oh, okay, got it. Thank you so much.
And I
Well,
put a link.
we wanted to show you guys kind of one more cool kind of experimental Claude thing, and that'll probably take 10 minutes. And then after that, you might have new questions and you might have some follow-up. So if it's okay with everyone, we might want to just quickly present that because we think it's different and interesting. And Bryce and Baltazar are on point with that one.
Yeah, we'll try and get it done in 5 minutes or so to leave time for Q&A. But yeah, so I just basically, very basic version of Claude. I've got the Pro subscription, which is $20 a month, the Claude. And I opened up a chat and just said, here's the prompt, which is what I got from Ed, and the unit mix, which were the only two files. Can you solve the case study? And this is just sort of the chat with Claude, and I actually didn't attach the prompt, so I reattached it. Again, very basic. Claude's working here. I'll just show you my prompts. Came back with a model in Excel. Then I said, there's no summary page, so can you put a summary page on here? Here's the kind of stuff I want to see. The sort of key metrics that I like to look at. And so that's the next ask. So then Claude is working again. Also, I said, do you know how to create a cash flow waterfall page with the following assumptions? And I popped in the assumptions that we just talked about for modeling a typical waterfall. So now Claude is building again. Goes on for a little while working, and then the next step is we actually changed the inputs a little bit during the case. We decided to up the construction costs to be a little bit more realistic, and up the rents as well. So I made that change, and then it comes back again, and then there was a hiccup with the origination fee, whether that should be in there, and it should have been in there. So capitalized into the uses, just like we saw on Ed's model. So I selected option A, that origination fee should be paid up front with equity. And then the last thing was just sort of working out this circular issue where you have capitalized interest reserve into the model, which took a little bit of time. And then we added a annual cash flow tab as well, because it originally didn't have that. It was just the monthly page. And I always like to look at the annual page just to get a sense of, is the model working right? And then finally, asked Claude to put in a couple of checks. And the most important one, I think, usually is the amount of equity drawn equal to the negative cash flows in the beginning of the model. So I asked it to put in a check for that. And then I think it put in a couple other checks on its own. So that's basically it. This was like 30 to 45 minutes or so of work back and forth. And then we get our model. So let me just close this out and then reshare what the model looks like, which is, I would say probably 90% of the way there. It's not formatted perfectly, but the answer is pretty close. And so if we just look at a comparison, so this is SAP Capital. Again, Ed is the best in the business at building models. And this is a Claude model, and we just kind of compared like these key metrics. So like the first thing I think Ed mentioned, sources and uses is really important. So is that calculating correctly? And so Ed's model was 26.189, Claude was 26.273. So pretty close within margin of error. The stabilized NOI is also another obviously pretty relevant metric, like what's your building earning when it's fully online and stabilized. So SAP Capital was 2.056, Claude was a bit higher, 2.094. So I didn't even like spend time looking into why these are different, but they're pretty small. Yield on cost, so this is just the NOI divided by your total cost or sources and uses, the cost of the building. So that's 7.85% for SEP Capital and 7.97%. That's probably the most important metric I like to look at. It's like, what's the building earning relative to what it cost? And then obviously the spread between that metric, which is almost 8%, and where you're going to sell it, which is your cap rate, is effectively your profit. So if you're going to sell it for like a 5.5 cap or something, the difference between 8 and 5.5 is going to be your profit here in the deal. The refinance loan, is important for that capital event that happens sooner rather than at the end, as Ed mentioned earlier. So the refinance loan was off by about $500,000. That might be something worth looking into. The exit valuation was spot on. It was exactly the same. And then if we look at the levered IRR, which kind of encompasses everything because it's all the cash flows out and the cash flows in, 22.56 for SAP Capital model versus 22.93 for Claude. So we're just a little bit higher. So again, it's not perfect. We're probably 90% of the way there. And then if we look at the formatting, it's like, okay, it's not great. Like the summary page isn't exactly probably how I'd want to see it. It's not like super clean or anything. The assumptions are okay. Again, not perfectly formatted. The schedule, which is just the monthly cash flow model, is actually pretty good in terms of how it's formatted, and that doesn't matter as much. And then the annual cash flow page is also fine. Nothing wrong with this really. And the waterfall too, not formatted that nice here, but did come up with basically the correct answer here. So I'd say it's 90% of the way there. And then with a little bit of coaching, you could probably have it sort of set up your own sort of version of formatting that you like to see, the metrics that you want to see. And again, this is just 30 or 45 minutes. So if I spent a couple hours on this, we could probably get a lot better. And certainly faster than me building it myself, which I don't know, Ed, you're pretty fast at building these things, but if I was going to build one of these things from scratch, it's at least several hours. Even if I took a template and just populated it, it's probably a couple hours of my own time. So anyway, that's just kind of an interesting exercise we did to sort of see what the head-to-head comparison looks like there. So I'm going to stop and turn it over to any Q&A. Any thoughts on this case or otherwise?
I have a question for you on the Claude model. That looks impressive. In my experience, like the formulas that it produces are not as conducive to actually checking and verifying. Like it does sometimes unnecessarily long formulas. Did you notice that as an issue when you built that model that you just had up on the screen?
Sorry, I'm muted here.
Bryce.
Yeah. I mean, I didn't dig into the formulas too much, but it runs fine. I mean, like you're talking about like, is it just like overly complicated and it slows the model down, or it's just like
not slowing
clean?
the model down, just like super long formulas, and it's like didn't necessarily need that.
Yeah.
Claude then, because like Claude doesn't know. So I was just curious if
you
noticed that at all, or like in your experience with Claude.
Maybe with something more complicated. This was a pretty simple model. I think, Ed, you mentioned this is of all the cases going to be the really simple one. So we'll see, if we're going to probably try and do this with all the cases. And so we'll have a little more to compare. But no, I would say it's not overly complicated. It's pretty simple what it came up with. And probably
I'm impressed by the
better.
waterfall. That's really cool that it was able to build a waterfall. I'm impressed by that.
Yeah, agree. And this probably couldn't have been done like even maybe 3 months ago or definitely not 6 months ago. So I was surprised. I was thinking there'd be a lot of hand-holding and to get it close to the 22% IRR and match up all those metrics, but they're really, I mean, literally it was like 45 minutes tops.
I think what's helpful too is like our take, at least on the blog, is like kind of this guided omni-channel AI thought process right now. I mean, maybe we'll be wrong, but what we're feeling is the alpha here is just knowing what is a waterfall, how should that work when I have a development, how does timing work, and what are these intricacies of construction interest and stuff, right? Because I think it feels like the skills are definitely shifting towards having a sense for those gaps, and to know that they even are there.
Yeah, and then like if you can spend less time on modeling, then you can spend more time on maybe other value add activities like figuring out like what the right rents are, or what the potential future supply is in the submarket that you're targeting for a new development. Exit cap rate, whatever it is, like gathering data that you can't really find on the internet that you have to actually talk to people to get. Like that kind of stuff will add more value potentially, and you can really dig in on that stuff more.
Also, just out of curiosity, did you guys try using other AI models and kind of compare performance of Claude versus, I don't know, ChatGPT?
No, I haven't. I'm sure they're probably similar. I've got a Claude account and a Perplexity account, and those are the only two that I pay for personally. But yeah, I bet they're probably comparable.
Yeah, I haven't tried ChatGPT, but I mean, it could be an interesting kind of self-test. Do it yourself and see what it comes up with. And I'm curious where that one lands.
Thank you.
Yeah, and Claude has skills too. Like, they have like a finance skills package within that. There's like investment banking modeling. There was nothing like real estate specific. They don't have that yet. So I couldn't just like take a skill and just say build this model. But the chat worked pretty well. It wasn't even Claude Cowork. It was literally just the chat where I did all this.
Have you guys had anyone on this call had any luck or like insane progress with any of these AI things, or is it kind of somewhat experimental still for everybody?
I can speak to that. Like mine's been very experimental. And I'm primarily on the like SASB side of commercial real estate. So for me, it's very high level, like to read through a primer, but there's still a lot of things that I would like to read through the primer and know for my own peace of mind that AI might not pick up. But yeah, I'm starting to get into the modeling, but yeah, it's still kind of by hand for me.
Well, for the SASB side, is it a particular asset class or kind of all over?
All over. We really like the Class A office, like especially the New York office, industrial and the any like grocery anchored retail we like to look at as well.
Okay, sweet.
Yeah. And we do multifamily. There hasn't been as much this year, new issuance, but we definitely have we own a couple deals of multifamily as well.
Nice. That's awesome. Well, does anybody else have any kind of questions or follow-ups or feedback?
I think like today's session was like really helpful. I personally think that one thing that could be really helpful in the future maybe is maybe like a quick video sessions on like how you guys would walk through these kind of deals in like an IC setting. I think that'd be really interesting to see because when you do these case studies for like case model test, obviously you do have to walk the interviewer through the model, like the structure and how you've actually built out. But I, as a candidate, would love to kind of also prepare for how you would walk these kind of deals in the IC setting. I think that would be really helpful.
Okay, yeah, no, that's helpful feedback for sure. We'll keep that in mind, and we did put in a lot of effort to make sure these returns were within the realm of reason with the way that it ends up. So hopefully, like the 22 for development, but yeah, actually, how you would kind of voice that over. Appreciate that. Well, I'll kind of just plan to reply all to this chain with a copy of the prompt, the prompt rent roll file, and that empty answer key. We don't have an exact date set for the next case, but we'd like this to be a somewhat regular thing. Super open to feedback as to what you want to cover. We try to take inspiration from what we do on a daily basis. Of course, nothing is confidential that we're sharing. It's all been scrubbed and anonymized. But at the end of the day, the reasoning and skill set is what keeps us moving in our respective worlds. So hopefully it's a snapshot of just real life, right, and the real challenges. But we love and appreciate any ability to fire away questions and maybe breathe some life into the Discord community. It's definitely picking up, but the more people chatting and openly asking questions, we're hoping that might be more of an ecosystem. There's no stupid questions. All this stuff is tough, and there's not always a good guide online for this weird thing that you're having to deal with that everyone else seems to understand in the document, but you've never heard of it. So hopefully it's a good space for that and all sorts of other discussions. Bryce, I don't know if there's anything else that you'd like to add.
Yeah, just that we'll be kind of, innovate, trying to figure out this whole AI thing and apply it to our own work, and distill thoughts and conclusions and how we think it might impact real estate, and just try and share what we're learning, with everyone in the community to help you guys sort of stay on top of it. So, we'll be focused on that. I do appreciate the feedback about an investment committee setting. We can think about how we can add some value there as well. And just again, thank you so much for your time today, and hope to see you on another one.
Yeah. Thanks, guys. Thanks for making this happen. This is very much kind of a grassroots effort with us. So we really appreciate everyone joining. Like, it means a lot.
Yeah, thanks
All
for
right.
listening.
Have
Thank
a
you,
good
guys.
week, everyone.
Yeah, thank you guys.
You as well.
See you.
Bye bye.
Thank you.
See ya.